The wind, a relentless sculptor, had long since carved its signature into the facade of Blackwood Asylum. It was a mournful whisper through the shattered windows, a sigh that carried the dust of forgotten lives through the decaying corridors. For decades, the asylum had stood, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, its dark brickwork absorbing the sunlight as if hoarding secrets within its crumbling walls. Locals, their voices hushed with a mixture of fear and reverence, spoke of the lingering echoes, the spectral cries that could be heard on moonless nights. But for a small, clandestine group of urban explorers, the allure of Blackwood was irresistible. They called themselves the Echo Chasers, a moniker that spoke to their shared obsession with the forgotten histories that clung to abandoned places. Our leader, a man named Liam, was a veteran of countless such excursions. His face, etched with a network of fine lines, was a testament to the shadows he'd chased. His eyes, though weary, held a spark of an almost spiritual hunger for the truth hidden within the ruins. Then there was Chloe, a photographer, her camera always poised, ready to capture the spectral beauty of decay. Her art was not about the pristine, but about the profound melancholy of what was left behind. Mark, the pragmatist, was our gear expert, a walking encyclopedia of safety protocols and emergency procedures. He was the anchor that kept us grounded when the otherworldly pull of the abandoned threatened to overwhelm. And finally, there was me, Sarah, the writer, the one who tried to translate the silence of these places into words, to give voice to the voiceless stories that whispered in the dust. Blackwood Asylum was our holy grail. Its reputation preceded it, whispered in hushed tones around campfires and dimly lit bars. Tales of unethical experiments, patient abuse, and unexplained disappearances painted a grim picture of its past. We'd spent months researching, poring over old newspaper clippings and dusty archives, piecing together fragments of its history. The asylum had been founded in the late 1800s, a grand, ambitious project meant to revolutionize mental health care. But by the 1950s, its name had become synonymous with horror. Rumors of a Dr. Alistair Thorne, a brilliant but dangerously unhinged psychiatrist, dominated the narrative. He was said to have conducted barbaric therapies in the name of progress, pushing the boundaries of what was considered ethical. Our approach to the asylum was meticulously planned. We arrived under the cloak of a moonless night, the only light provided by our headlamps, which cast long, dancing shadows that stretched and contorted, making the familiar seem alien. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, a pungent perfume that spoke of a world reclaiming its own. We navigated a forgotten service road, overgrown with thorny brambles, until we reached the crumbling perimeter wall. A section had collapsed years ago, leaving a gaping maw that invited us into the heart of the beast. The silence within the asylum was not an empty silence, but a heavy, breathing presence. It was the silence of 1,000 unspoken words, of 1,000 desperate cries that had long since faded into the very fabric of the building. Dust motes danced in the beams of our headlamps, illuminated like tiny, lost galaxies. The floorboards groaned beneath our weight, each step a reverberation through the stillness. We moved through the main hall, a grand space that once boasted high ceilings and ornate plasterwork, now a skeletal shell of its former glory. Wallpaper peeled in grotesque strips, resembling desiccated skin. Furniture, what little remained, lay overturned and broken, like the shattered remnants of a forgotten life. Our first objective was the administrative wing, where we hoped to find patient records or other documents that could shed more light on the asylum's dark history. The offices were a chaotic mess of overturned desks and scattered papers. We meticulously sifted through the debris, our gloved hands carefully navigating the sharp edges of broken glass and splintered wood. It was in one of these offices that Chloe stumbled upon a small, leather-bound journal, tucked away beneath a collapsed bookshelf. Its pages were brittle and yellowed with age, filled with a cramped, spidery handwriting. It was the diary of a nurse, Clara Finch, detailing her daily observations and growing unease about the asylum's practices. Clara's entries painted a chilling picture. She wrote of patients subjected to hydrotherapy, in icy cold baths for hours on end, of electroshock therapy administered with frightening regularity, and of a particularly disturbing isolation chamber, where patients were left in total darkness for days, sometimes weeks. But it was her accounts of Dr. Thorne that truly sent shivers down our spines. He was depicted as a charismatic but deeply disturbed individual, convinced he was on the verge of a medical breakthrough. Clara's entries grew increasingly frantic, detailing her fear for the patients and, ultimately, for her own safety. Her last entry was a single, trembling sentence. "He knows." The journal ended abruptly, leaving us with a profound sense of unease. As we delved deeper into the asylum, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air seemed to grow colder, despite the absence of any drafts. We found ourselves in the patient wards, rows of iron bed frames, many still with their rusted springs exposed, stretching into the gloom. The faint, sweet smell of decay, mingled with something else, something metallic and vaguely acrid, hung in the air. On the walls, faded drawings and scribbled messages hinted at the desperate lives lived within these confines. One drawing, crudely sketched with charcoal, depicted a human figure with eyes that were black voids, its mouth open in a silent scream. Below it, scrawled in an unsteady hand, were the words, "He watches." It was in the deepest recesses of the asylum, in the medical wing, that we found the isolation chamber Clara had described. It was a small, windowless room, its walls lined with thick, soundproofed padding. The door was heavy, reinforced steel, with a small, rusted peephole. A single, bare light bulb hung from the ceiling, its filament long since broken. The air inside was stagnant, heavy, as if the darkness itself had become a tangible entity. Mark, ever the cautious one, insisted we not linger. But as Chloe took a photograph, her flash illuminating the room, we all saw it. On the padded wall, scratched into the fabric with what looked like fingernails, were dozens of small, vertical lines, each one a testament to the agonizing passage of time. And below them, one word, repeated over and over again, like a desperate mantra: "Help!" As we made our way back through the main hall, a sudden, sharp crack echoed through the building. We froze, our hearts hammering against our ribs. It sounded like something had fallen, something heavy. Liam, ever the leader, motioned for us to proceed cautiously. We discovered the source of the noise in the asylum's old chapel. A large, ornate crucifix had toppled from its mount on the wall, shattering into pieces on the stone floor. It was an old building, undoubtedly, and decay was its constant companion. But the timing, the sheer suddenness of it, sent a shiver down my spine. It felt less like a random act of entropy and more like a deliberate statement. Later that night, back in the relative safety of our camp, the events of the day replayed in our minds. Clara's journal, the isolation chamber, the fallen crucifix, each piece added to the disturbing mosaic of Blackwood Asylum. We spent hours discussing our findings, trying to piece together the full narrative. But the more we uncovered, the more questions arose. What happened to Clara? What was he referring to in her final entry? And who were the people who had endured such unspeakable torment within those walls? The following day we returned, drawn back by an irresistible pull. Our plan was to focus on the basement, a section of the asylum that had been largely unexplored due to its instability. The air in the basement was even colder, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something profoundly unsettling, like stale blood. Our headlamps cut through the inky blackness, revealing a labyrinth of narrow corridors and forgotten storage rooms. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, clung to everything, glistening with condensation. We found what appeared to be the asylum's old morgue. The stainless steel tables, once pristine, were now corroded and stained. A single, rusted gurney stood in the center of the room, looking like a forgotten instrument of torture. The silence here was different, an oppressive silence that pressed down on us, stealing the very air from our lungs. Chloe, ever the artist, began taking photographs, the flash illuminating the grim reality of the room. As she did, Liam let out a sharp gasp. On the wall, obscured by a thick layer of grime, were a series of symbols, painstakingly carved into the concrete. They were not words, but intricate geometric patterns, unsettling in their symmetry. Mark, who had a passing interest in occult symbols, examined them closely. "These look like sigils," he murmured, his voice hushed. "Protection sigils, perhaps, or even summoning symbols. They're old, very old." The idea that something other than scientific pursuits had taken place within these walls was profoundly disturbing. It suggested a darker, more malevolent undercurrent to Dr. Thorne's experiments than we had previously imagined. As we continued through the basement, we came across a series of sealed doors, their hinges rusted shut. One, in particular, drew our attention. It was heavier than the others, reinforced with steel plates, and secured with multiple padlocks, all of them rusted beyond recognition. There was a small, rectangular opening at eye level, a narrow slit that offered a glimpse into the darkness beyond. Liam tried to pry it open, but it was unyielding. The silence, which had been a constant companion, was suddenly broken by a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from behind the door. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It sounded like fingernails dragging against concrete. We all exchanged wide-eyed glances. Our logical minds scrambled for an explanation. A rat? A settling of the old building? But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. It continued for several agonizing seconds before abruptly stopping. The sudden silence that followed was even more unsettling than the scratching. Liam, his face pale, tried the door again, but it remained stubbornly shut. We spent the rest of the day meticulously mapping the basement, documenting our findings, and trying to decipher the meaning of the sigils. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the cracked windows above, we decided to make our way out. The air in the asylum grew noticeably colder as dusk settled, and the whispers, which had been faint throughout the day, seemed to grow in intensity, a cacophony of disembodied voices murmuring just beyond the edge of our perception. On our way out, as we passed through the main hall again, Chloe stopped abruptly. Her camera, which had been slung over her shoulder, was now clutched in her hands, its lens pointing towards a darkened corner. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. We listened, straining our ears, and then we heard it too. A faint, almost imperceptible moan, a low, guttural sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. It was the sound of profound suffering, an echo of pain that had lingered for decades. We didn't linger. The moan, the scratching, the sigils, they all coalesced into a chilling narrative that transcended simple decay. Blackwood Asylum was not merely an abandoned building. It was a living tomb, a repository of tormented souls. We made our way out into the night, the silence of the forest a welcome reprieve after the oppressive atmosphere of the asylum. The journey back to our base camp was largely silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts, grappling with the profound sense of unease that had settled over us. We reviewed Chloe's photographs, hoping for some further clues, some tangible evidence of what we had experienced. Most of the images were as expected: decaying walls, rusted equipment, shattered glass. But then, she came across a series of pictures she had taken in the morgue. In one of them, taken just as she heard the faint moaning, there was a subtle distortion, a ripple in the air, almost like heat haze, just above the gurney. It was too indistinct to be anything conclusive, but it sent a fresh wave of chills through us. Was it a trick of the light, or something else entirely? Liam, who had remained stoic throughout our expeditions, seemed particularly affected. He was a man of logic, a skeptic who always sought rational explanations. But even he seemed to be struggling to reconcile what we had witnessed with his worldview. He confessed that night, around the flickering warmth of our campfire, that he had felt an inexplicable sense of dread growing stronger with each passing hour we spent within the asylum's walls. He described a feeling of being watched, of an unseen presence that followed our every move. The next day, a sense of quiet determination settled over us. We knew we couldn't just walk away. The story of Blackwood Asylum, the suffering it had witnessed, demanded to be told. We spent hours researching Dr. Thorne, digging deeper into his past, trying to understand what drove him. We found fragmented reports of his dismissal from several prominent institutions before he founded Blackwood, each dismissal shrouded in vague accusations of unorthodox practices and ethical breaches. He was a man obsessed with the human mind, but his methods were clearly abhorrent. We decided on one final expedition, a return to the sealed room in the basement. We knew it was risky, but the scratching sound, the palpable sense of dread it evoked, demanded investigation. This time, Mark came prepared with a set of tools: pry bars, a sledgehammer, and a powerful bolt cutter. The journey back into the asylum felt different. The air was colder, the whispers more insistent. It was as if the building itself knew our intentions, resisting our intrusion with a palpable force. As we descended into the basement, the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The cold was a physical presence, seeping into our bones. The scratching sound, though faint, was now unmistakably present, emanating from behind the sealed door. It was no longer rhythmic, but erratic, desperate, like something trying to claw its way out. With Mark's tools, we began to work on the door. The rusted padlocks groaned and shrieked as the bolt cutters bit into them. The heavy steel groaned under the assault of the pry bars. Each metallic shriek echoed through the cavernous basement, a jarring counterpoint to the insistent scratching from within. It took us over an hour, our muscles aching, our hands raw, but finally, with a groan of protest, the heavy door swung inward, revealing the inky blackness beyond. A wave of something akin to stale air, mixed with a sickeningly sweet odor, washed over us. It was the smell of decay, but more profound, more ancient than anything we had encountered before. Liam flicked on his powerful headlamp, and the beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the horrifying scene within. The room was small, even smaller than we had anticipated. The walls were covered in the same soundproofing material as the isolation chamber we had found earlier, but here it was not merely scratched. It was shredded, torn to ribbons, as if something had violently thrashed against it for an unimaginable length of time. But it was the center of the room that truly froze us to the bone. There, in the center of the floor, was a crudely constructed wooden chair, bolted to the concrete. Strapped to the chair with rusted leather restraints was a skeletal figure. It was impossible to tell if it was male or female, so utterly had time and decay ravaged the remains. The bones were yellowed, brittle, and covered in a fine layer of dust. The head was tilted unnaturally to one side, facing the door, its empty eye sockets staring out into the void. But it wasn't just the skeleton that filled us with horror. Scrawled on the walls in what looked like dried blood were the same intricate geometric symbols we had found in the morgue, repeated over and over again, covering every inch of the padded surface. And beneath the skeletal figure on the concrete floor was a large, dark stain, long since dried and faded, but unmistakably the residue of something vile. Silence descended upon us, a silence so profound it was deafening. We stood there, transfixed, our breath catching in our throats. The air was thick with the weight of unspeakable suffering, of a life that had ended in unimaginable torment. The scratching sound, we now realized, had been the sound of this poor soul, trapped in the darkness, struggling against its restraints, desperately trying to escape its horrific fate. Chloe, despite her usual composure, began to tremble, her camera forgotten. Mark, the pragmatist, looked utterly shell-shocked. Liam, his face a mask of grim determination, slowly reached for his phone, his finger hovering over the emergency services number. As for me, the writer, I found myself overwhelmed by a profound sense of sorrow and anger. This was not just a story. It was a testament to the darkest depths of human cruelty. The victim in that chair, reduced to a nameless skeleton, was a ghost of Blackwood's past. A tragic figure whose silent scream had reverberated through the very walls of the asylum for decades. We carefully documented everything, taking photographs, making notes, and ensuring we disturbed nothing. The police investigation that followed was extensive. The discovery of the remains, coupled with Clara Finch's journal and our extensive research into Dr. Thorne, blew the lid off the long-forgotten horrors of Blackwood Asylum. Dr. Thorne, it turned out, had disappeared without a trace shortly after the asylum's closure in the 1950s. The prevailing theory was that he had fled, anticipating legal repercussions. But the presence of the sigils, the deliberate nature of the ritualistic confinement, suggested something far more sinister than simple medical malpractice. The case remains open, a cold case that continues to haunt the annals of local history. The echo chasers, after Blackwood, ceased their explorations. The experience had been too profound, too disturbing. We had sought forgotten stories, and we had found them, but the cost to our collective psyche was immense. Blackwood Asylum, a hulking monument to forgotten suffering, stands even today, its secrets now partially revealed, but the full extent of its horrors still echoing in the mournful whispers of the wind. And sometimes, on moonless nights, I swear I can still hear it, that faint, desperate scratching. A chilling reminder of the unknown terrors that can be hidden within the walls of a seemingly abandoned building. The weight of that knowledge, the chilling reality of what humans are capable of, changed us forever. It taught us that sometimes, the true horrors aren't the ghosts that whisper in the dark, but the monsters that walk among us, leaving behind a legacy of pain that reverberates through time, long after their physical presence has vanished. The silence of abandoned places holds not just echoes, but the very essence of human suffering, a profound and disturbing truth that no amount of research or preparation can truly prepare you for. The old orphanage, known simply as St. Jude's, loomed over the town of Havenwood like a forgotten gargoyle, its vacant windows staring out at the world with an unsettling blankness. Locals, their voices hushed with a peculiar blend of sadness and unease, recounted fragmented tales of its abrupt closure decades ago, whispering of a mysterious illness that swept through the children, leaving a trail of grief and unanswered questions. For years, it had stood as a testament to faded dreams and lost innocence, a silent monument to a past that refused to stay buried. Our team, the Historians of Decay, a group dedicated to preserving the narratives of abandoned places, had heard the whispers and felt an undeniable pull towards St. Jude's. We believed that every crumbling brick and every peeling wallpaper held a story, a chapter in the larger human narrative that deserved to be remembered. Our leader was Elias, a former history professor whose passion for the forgotten was as boundless as his knowledge. He was meticulous in his research, driven by a quiet but fierce determination to uncover the truth. Sarah, our resident audio engineer, brought a keen ear and an array of sophisticated recording equipment, convinced that the silence of these places held audible secrets. Ben, the pragmatic one, was our security and logistics expert, always ensuring our safety and the integrity of our equipment. And then there was myself, Amelia, the chronicler, tasked with weaving the fragmented threads of our discoveries into a cohesive narrative, to give voice to the spectral whispers of the past. St. Jude's was a particularly challenging subject. Its history was shrouded in secrecy, with official records mysteriously missing or heavily redacted. The common narrative spoke of a swift, unannounced closure in the late 1960s, a sudden evacuation of all the children and staff, leaving the building frozen in time. Rumors circulated about a contagious disease, a wasting sickness that left its victims frail and listless, but no definitive medical records supported these claims. The lack of concrete information only fueled our curiosity, strengthening our resolve to unravel the mystery. We approached St. Jude's on a crisp autumn morning, the air carrying the scent of damp leaves and impending cold. The building was a study in architectural melancholy, its Victorian grandeur now marred by crumbling cornices and a slate roof that resembled a broken smile. The main entrance, a heavy oak door, was boarded up and chained, a clear sign of unwelcome. We circumvented the perimeter, eventually finding a broken window on the ground floor, half obscured by overgrown ivy, that offered a precarious entry point. The interior of St. Jude's was a chilling tableau. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that pierced through the grime-covered windows, illuminating a world frozen in time. Small, wooden chairs lay overturned in what must have been a classroom. A child's forgotten teddy bear slumped in a corner, its button eyes staring blankly. The air was thick with the peculiar scent of aged paper and something else, something vaguely sweet and sickly, reminiscent of old flowers left too long in a vase. Our first objective was the administrative office, hoping to find any surviving documents. The room was in disarray, papers strewn across the floor, filing cabinets overturned. It was clear that the closure had been sudden, a hasty departure rather than a planned shutdown. Elias, with his practiced eye, began sifting through the chaos, his gloved hands meticulously examining each document. It was in a forgotten drawer beneath a pile of textbooks that he discovered a small, leather-bound diary, its cover faded and worn. The name Elara Vance was embossed on the front, a delicate, cursive script. Elara's diary was a heartbreaking testament to life within St. Jude's. She was a young teacher, recently graduated, filled with idealism and a genuine love for the children under her care. Her early entries spoke of the joys and challenges of teaching, the laughter of the children, their small triumphs and heartbreaks. But as the diary progressed, a darker tone emerged. She began to mention a growing sense of unease, a peculiar quietness that had settled over the children. They were becoming withdrawn, losing their appetites, their playful energy replaced by a listlessness that worried her deeply. She described recurring nightmares among the children, vivid dreams of a dark figure lurking in the shadows, whispering their names. The most disturbing entries detailed her growing suspicion that something was fundamentally wrong beyond a simple illness. She wrote of unexplained cold spots in certain areas of the orphanage, the feeling of being watched, and the disembodied whispers she sometimes heard when alone in the corridors. Her final entry, written in a shaky hand, was a desperate plea. "They are taking them, one by one. I hear their cries in the night, the whispers. They are not just dreams. They are real, and they want them." The diary ended there, abruptly, leaving us with a profound sense of dread. As we moved through the orphanage, the unsettling atmosphere intensified. In the children's dormitories, rows of small, rusted beds stood like silent sentinels. On one bed, a faded, well-loved rag doll lay face down, its tiny calico dress stained with what looked like dried tears. Sarah, with her audio equipment, set up microphones in various rooms, hoping to capture any ambient sounds. As we moved into the playroom, a sudden, chilling giggle echoed through the otherwise silent space. It was faint, barely perceptible, but undeniably there. It was the sound of a child's laughter, innocent and joyous, yet utterly out of place in the desolate stillness of the abandoned building. We all froze, our hearts hammering against our ribs. Ben, ever the pragmatist, immediately began scanning the room, searching for a rational explanation. A faulty recording? A trick of the air currents? But the sound was too clear, too distinct. We later analyzed the audio recording. The giggle was indeed present, isolated and distinct, followed by a faint, almost inaudible whisper, too distorted to make out words. The experience left us shaken, convinced that the orphanage held more than just the echoes of past lives. Our next objective was the basement, a section of the orphanage that, according to Elara's diary, had been off-limits to the children. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended the creaking wooden stairs, a damp, earthy smell mingling with the sickly sweetness we had encountered earlier. The basement was a maze of dark, unlit corridors, with low ceilings that made us instinctively duck. Our headlamps cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing shelves lined with dusty, broken toys and discarded furniture. It was in the deepest part of the basement that we discovered a hidden room, concealed behind a makeshift wall of old crates. Elias, with a surge of adrenaline, began to meticulously dismantle the crates. As the last crate was moved, a wave of cold air washed over us, and a profound sense of dread settled in the pit of our stomachs. The room was small and circular, with rough, unadorned stone walls. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate wooden table, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. Around the table were 5 smaller, wooden chairs, each with a single, small iron manacle attached to its armrest. But it was what lay on the table that truly turned our blood to ice. Strewn across its surface were various macabre artifacts. A collection of dried herbs tied with faded ribbons, small, intricately carved wooden dolls with blank, painted eyes, and a collection of rusted surgical instruments. And at the very center, carefully laid out, was a child's faded drawing. It depicted stick figures, presumably children, holding hands, but instead of faces, they had black, hollow eyes, and above them, a large, looming shadow with tendril-like arms seemed to be pulling them upwards. Below the drawing, scrawled in a child's shaky hand, were the words, "He takes us." The implications were horrifying. This was not a medical illness. It was something far more sinister. The manacles, the instruments, the ritualistic arrangement of the artifacts. It suggested a dark, ritualistic purpose. The whispers, the chilling giggle, the recurring nightmares described in Alara's diary. They all coalesced into a terrifying narrative that pointed to something beyond the realm of the natural. As we stood there, frozen in terror, a faint, high-pitched whimpering sound echoed from the far corner of the room, barely audible, like a trapped animal. We spun around, our headlamps sweeping the shadows. Nothing. The sound stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving behind an oppressive silence that was far more unsettling. Ben, visibly shaken, urged us to leave. "This is not decay," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "This is something else. Something evil." We documented everything we found in the hidden room, taking photographs and meticulous notes. The experience had profoundly affected us, shattering our initial assumptions about St. Jude's. This was no longer just a historical exploration. It was an investigation into a profound and disturbing mystery. The journey back to our base camp was somber. We spent hours dissecting our findings, trying to make sense of the ritualistic elements. Elias, drawing on his historical knowledge, began researching ancient cults and their practices, looking for parallels. Sarah reanalyzed the audio recordings, trying to filter out more of the whispers. And I, Amelia, struggled to piece together the narrative, feeling the immense weight of the children's unspoken suffering. The following day, a sense of urgency propelled us back to St. Jude's. We knew we had to find out what happened to the children, to give them a voice, to expose the truth that had been buried for so long. Our focus was now on the hidden room, the chilling epicenter of the orphanage's dark secrets. We believed that if we could understand the rituals, we could understand the fate of the children. As we entered the hidden room, the air seemed to thicken, the cold more pervasive, and the faint smell of decay more pronounced. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic click of Chloe's camera and the hushed whispers of Elias as he examined the carvings on the table. He theorized that they were indeed summoning sigils, meant to open a conduit between worlds, to draw something from beyond into this realm. The wooden dolls, he speculated, were effigies, perhaps representations of the children themselves. As Elias delved deeper into the esoteric symbols, Sarah's audio equipment suddenly crackled with static. A low, guttural growl, impossibly deep, filled our headphones, followed by a chorus of faint, childlike wails. It was not a recording. It was happening in real time. We ripped off our headphones, the sound too terrifying to bear. The air in the room grew heavy, oppressive, as if an unseen weight was pressing down on us. The temperature plummeted, and we could see our breath crystallizing in the frigid air. And then, in the corner of the room, a faint, ethereal mist began to coalesce, swirling and twisting. It was translucent, barely visible, but undeniably there. As we watched, horrified, the mist began to take on a vaguely humanoid shape, tall and gaunt, with an unsettling fluidity of movement. We could not make out features, but the sheer presence of it was overwhelming, radiating an aura of profound malevolence and ancient hunger. It was then that we heard it, clear as a bell, a small child's voice, filled with an unimaginable terror, whispering, "He's here." Ben, his face pale with terror, grabbed us, pulling us towards the makeshift exit. "We have to go. Now!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. We didn't hesitate. We scrambled through the narrow opening, our hearts pounding, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We didn't look back, not daring to glance at the monstrous presence that had manifested in the heart of St. Jude's. We burst out of the orphanage, gasping for breath, the crisp autumn air a welcome shock to our systems. We didn't stop until we reached our vehicle, our bodies trembling, our minds reeling from the horrifying encounter. The experience had been more than just disturbing. It had been a glimpse into a reality far darker and more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. We never returned to St. Jude's. The information we had gathered, the audio recordings, the photographs, the excerpts from Alara's diary, were compiled into a detailed report. We anonymously submitted our findings to various paranormal research organizations and investigative journalists, hoping that someone, somewhere, would be able to shed more light on the unspeakable horrors that had transpired within those walls. The official story of St. Jude's remains unchanged, a story of a mysterious illness and an abrupt closure. But we know the truth. We know that something ancient and malevolent had preyed upon the innocent children, drawn to them by dark rituals, their cries fading into the whispers that still haunt the desolate corridors of the orphanage. The experience shattered our understanding of reality, leaving us with a profound sense of the unseen forces that can lurk just beyond the veil of our perception. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear that child's desperate whisper, a chilling reminder of the spectral hunger that consumed the lost souls of St. Jude's, a story that will forever echo in the silence of that abandoned building. The forgotten dreams, the lost innocence, the horrifying reality of what happened in St. Jude's, became a chilling testament to the fact that not all stories are meant to be understood, and some truths are better left undisturbed. The remnants of the old Willow Creek Mill stood like a skeletal sentinel on the banks of the sluggish river, its broken windows like vacant eyes staring out at the world with an air of profound melancholy. For over 50 years, it had been abandoned, a decaying monument to a forgotten industrial era. The locals, their faces etched with a peculiar mixture of unease and a strange kind of reverence, spoke of the mill in hushed tones, weaving tales of an inexplicable fire that had consumed it one moonless night, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and lingering shadows. Our team, the Urban Chronicles, a collective of amateur historians and thrill-seekers, had always considered Willow Creek the ultimate challenge, the pinnacle of abandoned exploration. We sought not just to document decay, but to uncover the untold stories, to give voice to the silence of these forgotten places. Our leader, Marcus, was a retired fire marshal, his sharp intellect and meticulous nature perfectly suited to unraveling mysteries. He carried a deep, almost spiritual respect for the past, believing that every structure held a story waiting to be rediscovered. Eleanor, our photographer, possessed an uncanny ability to capture the ethereal beauty of ruin, finding art in the desolate landscapes of abandonment. David, the tech expert, was our eyes and ears, equipped with an array of drones, thermal cameras, and motion sensors, leaving no corner unexamined. And then there was myself, Liam, the reluctant scribe, tasked with translating our experiences into words, to bring the chilling silence of these places to life. Willow Creek Mill was steeped in local legend. The official records stated a catastrophic electrical fire, but the town's elders whispered of something more sinister. They spoke of odd occurrences leading up to the blaze. Strange lights flickering within the empty mill at night, disembodied whispers carried on the wind, and a pervasive sense of unease that settled over the entire valley. The mill itself had a troubled history, plagued by inexplicable accidents and a high employee turnover rate. Before its abandonment, it had been a bustling textile factory, a pillar of the community, but after the fire, it became a symbol of a past best left untouched. The lack of detailed fire reports, coupled with the locals' cryptic warnings, only intensified our fascination. We arrived at Willow Creek Mill just as the golden hour began to bathe the landscape in a soft, ethereal glow, creating long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort with a life of their own. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and a faint, almost metallic odor that we couldn't quite place. The main entrance, a massive, rusted steel door, hung precariously from a single hinge, a gaping maw inviting us into the heart of the ruin. The interior of the mill was a cavernous space, a skeletal framework of massive wooden beams and twisted metal. The fire had left its indelible mark, scorching the walls black and leaving behind a chaotic mess of collapsed machinery and charred debris. Dust motes, illuminated by the fading sunlight, danced in the air, creating an otherworldly haze. The silence here was not empty. It was a heavy, breathing presence, punctuated only by the occasional creak of settling timber or the rustle of unseen creatures. Our initial objective was the administrative office, hoping to find old blueprints or employee records that might shed light on the mill's hidden history. The office was a chaotic mess of overturned desks and scorched papers. Marcus, with his forensic eye, began sifting through the charred remnants, his gloved hands meticulously examining each document. It was in a heavily damaged safe, its door pried open and its contents scattered, that he discovered a small, leather-bound ledger, miraculously preserved from the flames. Its pages were brittle and singed, but the ink, though faded, was still legible. It was an employee logbook, meticulously kept, detailing the names, dates of employment, and, chillingly, the reason for termination or departure. As Marcus turned the pages, a disturbing pattern emerged. A significant number of employees had simply vanished, their entries marked with a cryptic "disappeared" or "left without notice." The most disturbing entries, however, were those of employees who had died under mysterious circumstances, often listed as accident with no further details. What struck us most was the frequency of these incidents in the years immediately preceding the fire. The mill, it seemed, was a place where lives were not just lost, but vanished without a trace, swallowed by its hungry maw. As we moved deeper into the mill, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. We found ourselves in the main factory floor, a vast, open space where rusted machinery stood like grotesque sculptures, silent witnesses to a forgotten industry. Eleanor, with her camera, began capturing the haunting beauty of the decay, the way the light filtered through the shattered roof, illuminating the dust-laden air. As she photographed an enormous, rusted loom, David's thermal camera suddenly flared. A distinct heat signature, humanoid in shape, flickered for a brief second on the screen, directly behind the loom, before vanishing as quickly as it appeared. We all exchanged wide-eyed glances. A trick of the light? A faulty sensor? But the image had been too clear, too distinct. We moved cautiously towards the area where the anomaly had appeared. The air grew noticeably colder, a sharp contrast to the humid summer night. And then we heard it, a faint, rhythmic clanking sound, like machinery starting up, emanating from the very heart of the mill. It was subtle, barely audible above the ambient sounds of the wind and the creaking timber, but undeniably there. Clank, clank, clank. It was the sound of the old mill coming back to life, a ghostly echo of its bustling past. But the sound was accompanied by something else, something profoundly unsettling, a low, guttural humming, almost like a mournful song, that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards beneath our feet. Our next objective was the basement, the lowest level of the mill, often the most overlooked and therefore the most likely to hold undisturbed secrets. The entrance to the basement was through a narrow, wooden door, its planks warped and swollen with moisture. As we descended the rickety steps, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of stagnant water and something else, something profoundly metallic and acrid, like old blood. Our headlamps cut through the inky blackness, revealing a labyrinth of cramped corridors and flooded passages. The sound of dripping water echoed through the subterranean gloom, creating an unsettling rhythm. It was in the deepest recesses of the basement, beyond a collapsed section of wall, that we discovered a hidden chamber. It was not built with the same rough stone as the rest of the basement. Instead, its walls were smooth, almost polished, and oddly free of the typical grime that coated everything else. In the center of the chamber was a shallow pit, filled with stagnant water, from which an unidentifiable, sickly green light seemed to emanate. Surrounding the pit were a series of crude, carved altars, each bearing faded, dark stains. But it was what lay scattered around the altars that truly turned our blood to ice. Old, rusted tools are not the typical tools of a mill, but implements that looked disturbingly like surgical instruments, along with a collection of bone fragments, too small to identify, but unmistakably organic. And at the edge of the pit, partially submerged in the eerie green water, was a single child's shoe, its leather cracked and its laces long since disintegrated. The implications were horrifying. This was not a fire caused by faulty wiring. This was something far, far worse. The tools, the bone fragments, the altars, and the chilling presence of a child's shoe. It all pointed to something ritualistic, something profoundly evil. The metallic smell, we now realized, was the scent of iron, of dried blood, mingled with the decay. The clanking sound we had heard upstairs, the ghostly hum, suddenly took on a new, terrifying meaning. It was the sound of something unholy at work, something that transcended the realm of the living. As we stood there, frozen in shock, the eerie green light in the pit pulsed, momentarily brightening, and a wave of profound cold washed over us, stealing the very air from our lungs. And then, from the stagnant water, a faint, translucent ripple spread outwards, and a distorted, guttural whisper seemed to emanate from the depths of the pit itself. A voice that was both ancient and deeply malevolent, uttering a single, chilling word: sacrifice. Marcus, his face a mask of grim determination, quickly began taking photographs and documenting everything. Eleanor, though visibly shaken, continued to capture the macabre scene. David, ever vigilant, scanned the room with his thermal camera, though it registered only an impossibly cold void around the pit. Liam, the scribe, felt an immense weight pressing down on him, the burden of witnessing such unspeakable horror. We understood then that the Willow Creek Mill was not simply an abandoned building. It was a charnel house, a site of ritualistic murders, the victims of which had been lost to time and fire. The journey back to our base camp was largely silent, each of us grappling with the horrifying discovery. We spent hours dissecting our findings, cross-referencing the employee logbook with our discovery in the basement. The disappeared entries now took on a grim new meaning. The mill, it seemed, had been a front for something unspeakably evil, a place where individuals, perhaps those without families or connections, were lured to their deaths, their bodies offered up in some twisted, archaic ritual. The fire, we now believed, was not an accident, but a desperate act to cleanse the mill, to erase the evidence of the atrocities committed within its walls. The following day, a sense of grim duty propelled us back to Willow Creek Mill. We knew we had to expose the truth, to bring justice to the nameless victims whose suffering had been buried beneath layers of ash and forgotten memories. Our focus was now on piecing together the timeline, correlating the disappearances with the cryptic entries in the ledger and the evidence of the ritual chamber. Marcus believed that if we could establish a pattern, we could uncover the identity of the perpetrators, or at least understand their motives. As we re-entered the mill, the air felt heavier, more oppressive, as if the very walls were weeping. The clanking sound was now more pronounced, a rhythmic beat that seemed to reverberate through the entire structure, accompanied by the low, mournful humming. It was louder now, closer, almost palpable. And then, as we approached the main factory floor, Eleanor's camera, which had been slung over her shoulder, suddenly flashed, repeatedly, even though no one was touching it. Each flash illuminated a fleeting, spectral image, translucent figures moving among the rusted machinery, their faces indistinct, their bodies writhing as if in agony. They were the ghosts of the mill, the forgotten victims, their tormented forms flickering in and out of existence, a silent scream frozen in time. We stood transfixed, a primal fear seizing us. These were not just echoes. They were manifestations, a desperate plea from the restless spirits trapped within the mill. The clanking intensified, and the humming rose to a low, guttural moan, seemingly emanating from every shadow. The air grew impossibly cold, and the metallic scent of blood was overpowering. And then, from the hidden chamber in the basement, a chilling shriek pierced the air, a sound of unimaginable agony and despair. It was not human. It was something primal, ancient, and utterly terrifying. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated suffering, amplified 1,000 times. Marcus, his face pale but resolute, yelled, "That's it. We have enough. We need to get out of here." We didn't need to be told twice. We scrambled out of the mill, a profound sense of urgency propelling us forward. The spectral figures, though no longer visible, seemed to press in on us, their silent cries echoing in our minds. The clanking and humming followed us, a macabre symphony of torment, until we were far from the mill's oppressive shadow. We compiled our findings into a comprehensive report, including all the photographic and audio evidence, the ledger excerpts, and our detailed observations. We submitted it to the local authorities, outlining the horrifying implications of our discoveries. The subsequent police investigation was extensive, but ultimately inconclusive. The sheer passage of time, the destruction caused by the fire, and the deliberate nature of the concealment made it impossible to identify the victims or the perpetrators. The case of the Willow Creek Mill remains an unsolved mystery, shrouded in the whispers of local legend. The urban chronicles, after Willow Creek, ceased their active explorations. The experience had been too profound, too terrifying. We had sought stories and we had found them, but the cost to our collective psyche was immense. The image of the skeletal mill, the flickering spectral figures, the chilling shriek from the depths of the basement, they remain seared into our minds, a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary places. Willow Creek Mill stands even today, its secrets now partially revealed, a silent testament to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. And sometimes, on moonless nights, when the wind whispers through the broken windows, I swear I can still hear it, that faint, rhythmic clanking, the mournful hum, and the distant, agonizing shriek, a chilling symphony of the damned, echoing through the desolate silence, a grim reminder that some stories, once uncovered, refuse to be forgotten, and some places hold a darkness that no amount of time or decay can ever truly erase.